It wasn't always like this. I used to believe that if I just tried hard enough, if I said the right thing or smiled the right way, eventually someone would look at me and say, "We're proud of you too." But in our family, pride had a very specific shape. Blonde hair, straight teeth, a polished laugh that didn't scare people. That shape was Sienna. From the time we were little, she was the one my parents paraded like a trophy. Her school photos got framed, mine went into a drawer. She wore sashes and crowns. I wore jeans and questions. Sienna knew how to glide through a room, how to land a compliment with just the right timing. I remember once when we were 10, a guest asked my mom, "Do you have any other kids?" My mom laughed. "Oh yes, the quiet one. I was sitting right there." I didn't say a word. At first I tried to catch up. I joined clubs, entered contests, even wore makeup for a while, just enough to earn a blink of recognition. I remember staying up all night to finish a painting for art class. My teacher cried when she saw it. I showed it to my dad, heart pounding. He nodded once and said Sienna just got first place in her recital. Isn't that great? The painting ended up under my bed. It's probably still there. By the time I was 16, I stopped trying to be noticed. I stopped going to family dinners unless I had to. I'd sneak into the library and sit between the shelves, burying myself in novels, biographies, world history, any life that wasn't mine. It became a kind of oxygen, those pages. Characters who failed, who struggled, who rebuilt. I began to see myself in the margins. I volunteered first at the local shelter, then with food banks, then tutoring kids after school. It wasn't glamorous, but it made sense. I wasn't doing it to prove anything. I wasn't chasing gold stars like Sienna. I just wanted to matter to someone, to do something that meant something. Meanwhile, Sienna soared. Pageants turned into pageant scholarships. Scholarships turned into degrees and polished internships. By college, she was posting photos in designer dresses at charity events while I was teaching English to migrant kids out of a van with no AC. But the family script never changed. If I visited home, my mom would chirp about Sienna's latest award while she handed me the wrong-sized towel. My dad would pat my shoulder, then turn back to Sienna's fiancé to talk golf or IPOs. They never asked what I did, never once said, "Tell us about your work." And I told myself I didn't need it. I convinced myself that being invisible meant I was free from expectation, free from scrutiny. But invisibility has a weight, too, a sharp, cold kind. It presses against your ribs when you hear your name skipped in a toast. It stings when a family photo circulates and you realize you weren't just forgotten, you were erased. The final proof, Sienna's wedding. Not a text, not a call. Just a tagged photo on an old neighbor's Facebook post. She looked stunning, of course she did. The kind of beauty that makes people forget to ask hard questions. And beside her stood the whole family grinning like they hadn't sliced off part of themselves. Like I never existed. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not crying, just still. The kind of still that happens right before something breaks. I remember getting up from the couch, walking to the mirror, and looking at myself like a stranger. My hair in a messy bun, a smudge of paint on my cheek from a school mural project. Tired eyes, honest eyes. And I said out loud, "You don't have to chase them anymore." That was the moment the grief started to loosen. Not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped begging. I threw myself deeper into my work. Applied for a post-grad fellowship I hadn't dared to try before. Moved to Sacramento. Shared a tiny overheated basement office with 2 other idealists who believed education could fix more than just test scores. That's where it started my nonprofit. A single fold-out table, 1 whiteboard, and a stubborn belief that kids in forgotten places still deserved a future. We named it EWC Education Without Conditions. No filters, no prerequisites, just impact. By the time I was 27, we had 4 teams running simultaneous projects in different states. A mobile literacy unit in Utah, a school repair program in Alabama, emergency funding for teacher supplies in rural Oregon. Our budget was lean, our metrics tight. We didn't have a PR team. We didn't do galas. We just worked. My parents never asked. Sienna never noticed. and somewhere deep inside, I told myself I didn't mind. Because while she was networking at champagne luncheons, I was helping a 6th grader in a town no one could find on a map finally spell her name out loud and smile when she did. That was enough. At least, I thought it was. Until something changed. Not in me, but around me. A shift I didn't see coming. The kind that starts with a whisper and ends in a name being said out loud in a room you were never supposed to enter. And that's when everything started to unfold. The invitation came in a forwarded email, almost an afterthought. I had just returned from Mississippi. Our field team had finalized a new mobile school unit, and I was exhausted, sunburned, and slightly sick from dehydration. My inbox was overflowing. Dozens of grant updates, team check-ins, and supply reports waiting. But buried in the middle was a subject line I didn't recognize. Invitation Whitmore Foundation Annual Gala. I almost deleted it. I assumed it was spam or worse, another networking event where everyone wore tailored suits and spoke in acronyms where no one actually listened unless you had a title worth bragging about. But one of our newer board members, a quiet logistics genius named Matt, sent a message shortly after you should go. Trust me, this one's different. So I clicked, and there it was. A personalized invitation, elegant, crisp font, the kind of stationery you could smell the money on through a screen. Still, I hesitated. My instinct was to decline, not out of bitterness, but protection. These weren't my rooms. These weren't my people. I didn't want to end up standing near the shrimp tower with a name tag no one cared to read, making small talk with donors who only wanted stories sad enough to make them feel generous. But something about Matt's tone lingered. This one's different. So I said yes. It was only later, 3 days before the gala, that I found out who the Whitmores were. I was scrolling a news article, just killing time between flights when I saw her. Sienna, gown, flashbulbs, smiling beside a man with the kind of face that looks good on the back of a boardroom chair. Alexander Whitmore III. I blinked. No. I pulled up her wedding photo again. Sure enough, it matched. Same man, same smirk. My sister had married into the Whitmore family, and the Whitmore Foundation Gala, that was their signature event. Suddenly, the invite didn't feel so random. I sat there frozen in the airport lounge, the noise around me fading into the dull hum of disbelief. Of course I hadn't been told. Of course no one mentioned it. My presence would have clashed with the image they'd crafted. Perfect daughter, perfect marriage, perfect guest list. I almost backed out, almost clicked the regretfully decline button, but then I thought of that girl again, the younger version of me, the one who used to peek around corners during family events hoping someone would ask what she was reading, the one who always brought her report card to the table like it was an offering. I thought of her, and then I thought of the woman I had become. No, I would go. Not for them, for me. Not as a statement, not to cause a scene. Just to stand in the same room and see what it felt like not to shrink. And so I prepared. No glam squad, no last-minute panic shopping. Just a black dress I already owned, fitted minimal purposeful. I wore my hair simple, my shoes comfortable. I printed my name on the RSVP card, Alara E. Winslow. No titles, no resume, just me. I arrived early enough to disappear into the crowd, but late enough to avoid the pre-gala photo call. And the moment I stepped inside that ballroom, it felt like walking into a dream I didn't remember having. The space gleamed, marble floors like glass, a wall of orchids spilling down in sheets behind the string quartet, soft lighting, crisp air that smelled faintly of lemon and something floral I couldn't place. No one noticed me at first, and that was fine. I wasn't there for attention. I walked toward the refreshment table and reached for a glass of water, and then I heard it. Alara Winslow. I turned. There she was, Celia. I hadn't thought of her in years, not since that small gala in Denver where we'd talked logistics and field funding like it was jazz. I didn't know her last name then, just that she listened in a way most people didn't. Sharp, present, no pretense. Now she stood in a navy gown, hairpinned gaze steady, her eyes locked on mine. She didn't smile right away, just stared, and then softly, like she was talking to herself, "That's her." It didn't echo through the room. It didn't need to. In those 3 words, everything changed. I saw the ripple happen in real time. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-laugh. Someone near the champagne tower lowered their glass. Behind Celia, I saw a familiar figure stiffen. Sienna. She was standing by the sponsor's lounge in a cream satin gown that fit like it had been stitched onto her bones. Her smile faltered. Her eyes darted. She knew exactly what was coming and that she couldn't stop it. "That's her," Celia said again, this time to the man beside her, "the one I told you about, the founder of EWC." He blinked. "Wait. The Pine County Literacy Program." Celia nodded. Her. And in that moment, I felt something uncoil inside me. Not pride, not vindication, just relief. I had not imagined it. I had built something. And now, someone who mattered knew. I wasn't a shadow anymore. I didn't come to be seen. I came to stand still. In a room that once would have swallowed me whole, I stood at ease. Not stiff, not anxious, just still. Letting the sound wash over me. The delicate clinking of glasses, the polite laughter, the subtle hum of string instruments tucked behind floral screens. It was the kind of event where silence was dressed in velvet, where the powerful whispered and everyone listened. But now they were whispering about me. Not all at once and not with drama, but with that tilt of the head, the murmured phrase, the glance that lasted a moment too long. That's her. 3 syllables. A whisper. A wave. As Celia took me gently by the arm and led me deeper into the gala, I began to hear the shift, soft but certain. Board members I'd only known through forwarded memos leaned in to introduce themselves. One woman from the East Coast Fund called me a dark horse with a smile that didn't feel patronizing. Another man asked if I was the Winslow behind the mobile clinics and looked sheepish when I nodded yes. They didn't ask about Sienna, not one. They asked about Junction County, about solar kits, about retention metrics. One even quoted a line from a report I wrote 2 years ago, a buried footnote practically. Something about equity not being a charity model, but a logistics commitment. I hadn't thought anyone even read that far, but they had. And that was when I realized I hadn't been invisible. I'd just been watching the wrong people. For years, I'd poured my soul into this work thinking it was thankless unseen. But the right people had been noticing quietly. And now, because of one ripple, a single conversation years ago with Celia, here I was, being called by name, no resume recited, no Sienna-shaped shadow overhead. Across the room, I caught glimpses of her. She was trying to keep her cool, of course she was. But the laugh was delayed. The smile didn't land right. I saw her whispering to her friend group, saw the nervous glance she shot at Celia. Her husband stood nearby, oblivious or pretending to be. She wasn't unraveling, not exactly, but the shine was dimming. And I didn't need to say a word. I didn't need to flex. I didn't need to post. This was the silent counterattack. Not revenge, not spectacle, just truth. And truth doesn't shout. It simply stands. Celia introduced me to a donor from Chicago, then a former school board director from New Mexico. Each conversation lasted longer than the last. Each one ended with a handshake, and we need to talk more soon. I moved slowly through the space, not out of nerves, but because I didn't want to rush the quiet miracle of being seen. No spotlight, no speech, just work, reputation, respect, the kind you don't earn overnight. The kind you don't fake with filters or curated brunches. The kind that's built from sweat and secondhand vans and funding proposals scribbled at 2 a.m. For a moment, I thought about pulling out my phone, capturing this, immortalizing it. But I didn't. Some things don't need to be documented. They just need to be lived. I made my way to the back of the ballroom where a few younger guests were gathered near the gallery display images of classrooms, clinics, field reports. One photo stopped me cold. It was one of our teams in Montana, Maria Deshawn and little Ellie, a student who built a windmill from scrap parts. I remembered the moment that photo was taken. Ellie had turned and asked, "Do you think I can build real ones someday?" And I'd knelt beside her and said, "You already did." That photo was there, in this room, under glass, framed, labeled funded by EWC Initiative, founder A. Winslow. My initials, no Sienna, no middlemen, just me, just us. And in that moment, I knew I didn't need to be introduced to the Whitmore crowd. I didn't need to explain why I belonged. The work already had. I turned from the photo and found myself face to face with a woman I didn't recognize. She smiled, polished, friendly, and said, "Excuse me, are you Alara? My daughter teaches in Junction. She said your program changed everything." I nodded slowly. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. She grinned wider. "She's always been a good teacher, but now she says the kids beg to stay after school. They built a water purifier from one of your kits. She sent me pictures, and just like that, my throat tightened. Not from pride, but from something deeper, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, belonging. Not because I was invited, not because I dressed the part, but because something I built, something I gave my bones to, was rippling through lives I would never even meet. That was more than applause, more than validation. It was legacy. Sienna might have curated the guest list, but I had arrived anyway, and I hadn't had to push past anyone to get here. The door had opened, not because I knocked loud enough, but because someone on the other side already knew I mattered. It started as a flicker, a tiny pulse beneath the velvet hum of the room, the kind of shift only the deeply attuned notice. But I noticed, because it was familiar, the tension of eyes pretending not to look, of voices pitching lower, mid-sentence of bodies, angling just enough to block, deflect, observe. Sienna was unraveling. At first she held her pose like a statue sculpted for gala season, graceful, elegant, poised in cream satin, with her hand poised delicately around a flute of champagne. But as Celia introduced me to person after person, foundation chairs, advisory board leaders, press liaisons, I saw her start to crack. The tell was in her shoulders, too rigid. Then the smile, just a second too sharp, too delayed. And finally the eyes, darting, calculating, exposed. For the first time in our lives, the spotlight was slipping. And no matter how hard she tried to grip it, it was moving toward me. It wasn't that I was stealing anything. I hadn't raised my voice or made a speech. I hadn't announced myself or reminded anyone who I was. I had just shown up, and people noticed. They weren't clapping or gasping, but they were shifting, turning, tracking my movements in that subtle, high society way that speaks volumes in silence. I caught her whispering to a woman beside her, a friend from their curated circle. The woman looked confused, then surprised, then embarrassed, because now the balance of power in the room was no longer a given. One man from the Regional Education Board asked Celia if I was the Winslow behind the Arkansas pilot. Celia smiled. "She's behind a lot of things. You'd be surprised." And that's when Sienna made her move. She started weaving through guests. Slowly at first, making her way through the social clusters she'd carefully built, the webs of influence and proximity she used to control every room. I watched her approach a group near the center stage, her voice just a bit louder than necessary. "She's my sister," she said with a soft laugh. I knew too well the kind that wrapped poison in honey. She's always been the quiet one, brilliant but private. You know how it is. But the group didn't laugh with her. One of the women, an older woman with kind eyes and a gleaming pin on her shoulder, tilted her head. She didn't strike me as shy, just centered. Sienna blinked. That wasn't the script she expected. She pivoted, found another cluster, another chance to rewrite the story before it got out of hand. But the story was already alive, and it wasn't hers anymore. I stood at the refreshment table watching it unfold, watching how the more she tried to reclaim the moment, the more it slipped. Someone approached me from the LA Literacy Guild, said she'd been meaning to call for months. Another man from a logistics startup offered to help with our mobile clinics. A professor from Stanford handed me a card murmuring something about guest lectures and policy briefs. I nodded politely, grateful, calm. But inside, I was breathing air I hadn't tasted since childhood. Air without comparison, air without apology. I didn't chase these people. I didn't ask for their approval. And yet, here they were, curious, engaged, leaning closer instead of away. And I realized something. All those years I'd spent building quietly, they were never wasted. The silence wasn't empty. It was foundational. It was strength. Meanwhile, Sienna's movements became tighter, her laugh a little too fast, her gestures broader. She kept glancing at me now, not directly, but through the reflection of silver trays or the flutter of wine glasses. Her eyes tried to track who I was speaking with, who was speaking to me, and every time she looked, there was someone new. The power was shifting, and not because I was taking it, because I never needed it in the first place. That's what scared her. Sienna had built her identity on applause, on being seen, wanted, envied. But I had built mine in the shadows, on substance, on grit, on results no one posted about. And now that foundation was carrying me through a room she could no longer control. Celia remained close, occasionally glancing back at me with that proud, knowing smile of hers. She wasn't flaunting me. She was protecting me, positioning me, like a woman who had played this game before and was done letting women like me be erased. Sienna must have seen it too, because for the first time that night, she didn't look smug. She looked scared, not of me, but of what I represented. Proof. Proof that there was another way to be powerful, that you didn't have to be loud to be heard, that you didn't have to beg to be recognized, that sometimes the girl you ignored at the dinner table is the same woman who's now reshaping conversations across the ballroom. And no matter how hard you try, there's no PR strategy that can outshine truth. The whispers grew. She's the founder. She's the one Celia mentioned in that interview. She built that from scratch. And still I said nothing. Because sometimes silence isn't empty. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room. I wasn't planning to stay long. After the last round of introductions and a brief conversation with a woman from a STEM grant consortium, I made my way toward the lobby. The energy in the ballroom was still pulsing, subtle, elegant, but alert. Like everyone was waiting for the next notable arrival or whispered revelation. But I'd done what I came to do. I'd been present, not as a ghost, not as a footnote in someone else's life, but as myself. Alara Winslow, founder, builder. Name remembered without explanation. I crossed the hallway lined with gilded mirrors and quiet attendants heading toward the coat check when I heard it. A voice behind me, low, clipped, full of heat held just beneath the surface. Alara. I stopped, slowly turned. Sienna was there, standing in the hallway like a storm held together by willpower and lip gloss. Her hands were curled into fists by her sides, but her nails didn't dig into her palms. She wouldn't let herself look that undone. Not yet. Her makeup was flawless, but the muscle in her jaw twitched just once like something wanted to break loose. "Did you plan this?" she asked. Her voice was sharp but hushed, not for discretion, for control. Sienna always needed control. You waited until the perfect moment to walk in and steal the entire room. I tilted my head, keeping my voice quiet. I was invited. She laughed once short and bitter. "Don't play innocent. You knew she'd be here." "Celia, you used her." "I didn't use anyone," I said, still calm. "I showed up, like anyone else on the guest list." Her eyes burned. "You always do this. Pretend you're above it all. So humble, so noble. But deep down, you're just like the rest of us. You want the spotlight. You want attention." "No," I said simply. "I want impact. That's different." She blinked like the word stung. "You never used to be like this," she said, her voice faltering just slightly. I almost smiled. "That's funny, because I think I've always been exactly like this. You just never noticed." She paused, and in that tiny moment her face shifted. The mask cracked. A glimpse of the girl underneath the one who had always needed the world to applaud her, so she didn't have to look inward. Her voice dropped. "Do you know what it's been like trying to explain you to them?" I didn't answer. "You don't fit," she hissed. "You don't look the part. You make people uncomfortable." "That's not my problem," I said. "That's yours." Her mouth opened and closed. Her hand flexed at her side like she wanted to grab onto something. Onto me. Onto the narrative that was slipping out of her grasp. "You could have stayed in your lane," she whispered. "But instead, you had to show up and embarrass me." "No," I said. "What embarrassed you was the truth. And it's not new, it's just louder now." We stood there in silence. The ballroom music thudded gently through the walls behind us. Footsteps passed. Conversations floated. But in our little corner of that corridor, the world narrowed. Finally, she stepped closer. "I don't care how many people think you're impressive," she spat. "You're still the same girl who sat alone at lunch, the one no one wanted around." I met her gaze without flinching, and yet here I am, invited, welcomed, respected, without pretending to be someone I'm not. She flinched, just barely, but it was there. The mask cracked again, and this time I saw it fully, how fragile it had always been, how her whole world had depended on no one looking too closely. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. So I stepped forward, not in anger, but in clarity. "I didn't come here to ruin your night," I said. "I didn't even come for you. I came because the work matters. And apparently some people in your world finally see that." Sienna's face drained of color. "I told them you were small," she whispered. "I told them you weren't anything." I nodded slowly. "I know." And then I added, "But the thing about truth is it doesn't need permission." With that, I turned. She didn't follow. As I moved toward the lobby again, I saw Celia approaching from the corner of my eye, flanked by 2 donors, gracefully extricating herself to find me. When she reached me, she smiled warmly. Slipping out, "I think I've done what I came to do," I said. "I think so too," she replied, eyes gleaming. "I hope we'll talk more soon. There's space at the table for women like you." She reached for my hand and gave it a soft squeeze. Not performative, not rehearsed, just real. And then she was gone. Outside, the air was cool, not cold but crisp in the right way. Cleansing. Honest. My car pulled up. I stepped in, and I didn't look back. The ride home was silent. Not the kind of silence that scratches at your ears begging to be filled, but the kind that settles around you like a soft coat. Clean. Final. Free. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't scroll through messages. I didn't replay what happened in the hallway or mentally rehearse what I should have said, because for the first time in a long time, I had said exactly what I needed to, without apology, without performance. And it was enough. When I got to my apartment, I climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately. Each step felt lighter, like I was shedding something I'd been carrying for years. Maybe it was expectation. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the part of me that once believed I had to earn my place in my own family. The key turned in the lock and I walked inside. My place was small, cozy, lived in. A bookshelf leaned against the far wall, stuffed with field journals and paperback novels that had traveled with me through 6 states and 2 continents. Photos dotted the walls, not posed ones, but real ones. A student holding up her first completed worksheet, a field team dancing in the rain after finishing a school roof repair, a group of volunteers asleep in a van after 17 straight hours on the road. No family portraits, no carefully staged holiday cards, just truth, and people, and impact. I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the couch, letting the quiet wrap around me like a balm. The steam curled gently in the air, and I watched it rise, unhurried, unbothered. That's when I thought of her again, the younger me. The girl who spent her teen years in the library while the family went to Sienna's pageants, who stayed home during winter breaks to volunteer instead of skiing in Aspen, who got skipped in toasts cropped from photos forgotten on invitations. I imagined sitting beside her now, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and saying nothing for a while, just being there, until the silence settled. And then I'd say this: "You were never invisible. They just weren't looking in the right direction." Because the truth is, I didn't walk into that gala needing redemption. I didn't show up hoping for a spotlight or validation. I showed up whole. I'd been saying that's her to myself for years, every time we got a kid back in school, every time a mother sent a photo of her daughter building something out of scrap and confidence. Every time we proved that quiet work can change loud systems. Celia just said it out loud for the first time. That's her, not Sienna's sister. Not the girl we forgot to invite, not the one who didn't fit the aesthetic. Just me. Alara Winslow. I don't need their apologies. I don't need to rewrite the past. Let Sienna cling to her curated version of the story. Let her spin it however she needs to feel whole. Because I don't need to be part of someone else's fantasy anymore. I built my own reality. And in that reality, I don't have to shrink to be polite. I don't have to soften my truth to make others comfortable. I don't have to ask for permission to matter. They saw me now, but I saw myself first, and that will always be enough. Have you ever been the one they cropped out of the photo? The one they didn't invite, didn't mention, didn't see until it was too late? Drop your story in the comments. Let's talk about what it means to be seen. And if you're still building your quiet empire, don't stop. One day they'll say, "That's her," and you'll already know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's walking the same path. Your silence isn't weakness. It's power waiting to rise.